Ask most people whether the Bible calls debt a sin, and you will get a confident answer either way. The confident answers are both wrong. Scripture doesn't forbid borrowing. There's no verse that says you must not owe. What it does instead is stranger and, I think, harder to sit with. It describes what debt does to a person, and then it builds an escape hatch into the law itself. Miss the escape hatch, and you miss the whole argument. Proverbs 22 verse 7. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. Read that carefully, because it is not a moral judgment. It doesn't say the borrower has done wrong. It says the borrower has changed position. Something that used to be yours to decide is now decided elsewhere. Your next month is already spoken for. A portion of your work belongs to somebody you may never meet. That's not a sin, it's a status. And Scripture treats status very seriously. There is exactly one place where borrowing itself gets a moral verdict, and it isn't the borrowing. Psalm 37. The wicked borrows and does not repay. Not the wicked borrows. The wicked borrows and doesn't repay. The condemnation lands on the second half of the sentence. So the line isn't between people who owe and people who don't. It runs between people who intend to pay and people who never did. Here is the part almost nobody quotes. Deuteronomy 15. At the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a release. Every creditor shall release what he has lent to his neighbor. Every 7 years, debts between Israelites were canceled. Not restructured, not refinanced, canceled. And every 50th year, the Jubilee went further. Land went back to the family that had lost it. People who had sold themselves into service went home. Sit with what that means. In the law, debt had an expiry date written into it. It was never meant to be permanent. It was a temporary condition with a mandatory end. And the end didn't depend on the lender feeling generous. And the law knew exactly how people would try to get around it. A few verses later, Deuteronomy 15 again. Take care lest there be an unworthy thought in your heart, and you say, the 7th year is near, the year of release, and your eye look grudgingly on your poor brother, and you give him nothing. Think about how specific that is. The release was so real and so certain that lenders were expected to start refusing loans as the deadline approached. Why lend in year 6 when the debt evaporates in year 7? So the law names that instinct in advance and forbids it. Lend anyway. Lend knowing you may not get it back. That is a remarkable thing to legislate. It assumes the lender will look for the exit, and it closes it before he finds it. There is one place where we get to watch the system fail in real time. Nehemiah chapter 5. The wall is being rebuilt, there is a famine, and a great outcry goes up from the people. Not against an enemy, against their own countrymen. They were mortgaging their fields and their vineyards and their houses to buy grain. They were borrowing money to pay the king's tax on land they already owned. And some of them had run out of things to pledge, so they were selling their sons and daughters into service. Same nation, same law. The nobles were charging their own people interest and taking their land. Nehemiah calls an assembly and makes them give it back. The fields, the vineyards, the olive groves, the houses, and the interest they had taken. And they do. It is worth noticing what that story is not. It is not a story about a foreign oppressor. It is a story about what people who share a faith will do to each other when there is money in it and nobody is enforcing the rule. The same law goes one step further. Exodus 22. If you lend to my people, to the poor among you, you shall not be like a moneylender to him. You shall not charge him interest. Deuteronomy repeats it. No interest on a loan to your brother. Whatever else that is doing, it is drawing a line around a particular kind of transaction. Lending to someone in trouble was not to be a source of income. You could help them. You weren't to profit from the fact that they needed helping. The poor weren't a market segment. If you know the passage, you have already spotted the problem with what I just said. Deuteronomy 23 does not stop at forbidding interest. It says you may not charge interest to your brother, but to a foreigner you may. which sounds at first like the whole principle collapses. Be decent to your own and charge whatever you like to everyone else. Except the same law is relentless about the outsider living among them. Love him as yourself, it says, for you were strangers in Egypt. Do not oppress him. Leave the edges of your field unharvested so he can eat. So the distinction is not us and them. The word being used there is the traveling trader, the merchant doing commercial business, not the neighbor who has run out of grain. Which means the line was never about nationality. It was about what kind of loan it was. Money lent into a business venture is one thing. Money lent to somebody who cannot feed their household is another. And the second one was never allowed to be a revenue stream. Centuries later, Paul writes one line that most people remember and few finish. Romans 13. Owe no one anything except to love each other. It gets quoted as a ban on borrowing. Read in context, it sits in the middle of a passage about paying what you owe: taxes, revenue, respect, honor. The instruction is to settle what you owe, not to avoid ever owing anything, except one: the debt of love, which he says you never finish paying. So put the pieces together, and you get a picture that looks very little like modern borrowing. Debt existed. It was expected. It wasn't shameful. But it released on a fixed cycle. It could not be used to farm the poor, and the person who owed it was understood to have lost something real, which is why the law kept giving it back. Now look at what we have. Revolving credit has no seventh year. It's designed never to end, and the minimum payment exists to make sure it doesn't. Compound interest is a mechanism for making time work against the borrower rather than for them. Student debt follows people for decades, and in some systems, until death. None of that's fraud. Most of it is disclosed. But every one of those designs removes the exact feature the law insisted on, which is release. Which changes the question you should be asking. Not, is my debt a sin? Scripture doesn't put it that way, so neither should we. The question is whether the thing you have entered has a release in it. Is there a date, a real one, when this ends? Or have you agreed to a status with no seventh year, where the only exit is the one you build yourself? And the harder version. If the borrower is slave to the lender, then ask what that actually looks like in an ordinary week. Who decides where your next payment goes? How much of your work is spoken for before you do it? What you would be free to say no to if that number were zero. Scripture never calls debt a sin. It calls it slavery, and then it spends several chapters making sure it ends.